Good evening, everyone.
Kavod Harav, how are you?
Baruch Hashem, thank you. Okay. Okay, so we did Gimel, we did Bet, so we're going to Gimel. So it says here in the Torah, "V'kodem sheitol yadav yichabed habayit," right? Yeah, we spoke about this a little bit yesterday. So we said, right, you should sweep the floor, the Torah says, and don't leave any crumbs there. So says Bet Yosef, Perek Elu Dvarim. Where is this? Nun Aleph Amud Bet. It says there, Nechlaku Bet Shemai u Bet Hillel al zeh. There's a machloket between Bet Shemai and Bet Hillel. והפסיקה הליכת הגמרא בגמרא כמו שכתב רבנו וכתב רבנו יונה. So they paskin in the halacha, they paskin the halacha in the Gemara, just like it says in the Torah, and it says Rabbeinu Yona, Shema she'enanu nohagim. So it says now that we're not accustomed עכשיו לעשות כן, to do so, מפני שבימיהם שהיו נוהגים לסלק השולחן. But in their days, the custom was to remove the table, as we said yesterday, and קודם ברכה, before the blessing, והיו נוטלים ידיהם במקום שהיה שולחן עומד. So they used to wash their hands in a place where the table stood. הוא דאיכא למחה שמא יפלו המים. So there, right, we're concerned that perhaps the water will fall on the drip or on the crumbs of the bread. על הפירורים. אבל עכשיו שאין לנו נוהגים לסלק השולחן. But he says nowadays that we're not accustomed to remove the table like that. ואנו נוטלים ידיהם מחוץ לשולחן. Also we wash the hands, right, not in the vicinity of the table. מקום שאין שם פירורים, there's no crumbs there. לקרא המחש תמידי. So he says therefore there's no concern. So apparently, right, what he's saying is that in his times, in his place also, right, whatever, they were not really concerned about this. And this was Rabbeinu Yonah. But the truth is, that Shulchan Aruch doesn't paskin this way. He paskins that there is a issue there. It has to be, right. We have to be particular about that. Okay, so כתוב שם תוספות, ואף אגב דמותר ליד ביד פירורים שאין בהם כזית. So he says, right, that even though that it's allowed to destroy crumbs which don't have a kazite, Kol makom kasher laniuta, but it says it does cause poverty, right? When you do that, k'de'amrina perek kol habasar, like it says in perek kol habasar, which is in Chulin Kuf Hey Amud Bet. So, right, just to recap this whole thing, what are we saying over here? Uh, so uh, there is a prohibition in the Torah called Bal Tashchit, right? Anybody know what this means, Bal Tashchit? So, Bal Tashchit means you're not allowed to destroy, you know, a utensil, let's say, right, or something like that. So, the rabbis also decreed that you're not allowed to destroy food either. So, that's why we're not allowed to destroy bread, right? For instance, which is like the most important food that there is. Um, but nevertheless, right, it says Tosfot here that if it's less than a kazait, the size of those crumbs, there is no prohibition to destroy them because they're not significant. Like what are you going to do with them? So, but he says, nevertheless, it does cause poverty. So therefore, a person should be careful not to, disgrace breadcrumbs, which are on the floor, to mean that he steps on them, and things like this, right? Or he pours water on them, things like this, right? We don't want that. So that's why we sweep it up in order to avoid things like this.
But we're allowed to toss out the whatever we sweep up, right?
Yeah, so the truth is, you can just throw it in the garbage.
Someone had mentioned that to me that we don't throw away bread. Is that true?
Right, so that's what we're saying, right? That applies that if it's bigger than a kazite.
Okay, so what do we do with stale and old bread or moldy bread? I mean, like, what are we supposed to
So
do
what
with
do you
it?
do, right? If you have, because it's bigger than a kazite, so then the best thing to do is to put it in a separate bag and then throw it in the garbage. Why is that? Because then you're not destroying it by putting it in there, since the bag is guarding it. That's what you can do. It's very simple, you know. But what you shouldn't do is to put it in like a dirty bag, because then the fact that you threw it in there is already destroying it. You know what I mean?
How about dissolving it in water? Dissolving the,
Soaking, soaking the bread in water.
yeah, and
Uh,
then
is,
just pour the
is there a
water.
reason why you want to do that?
I mean, instead of putting it in a trash bag or something.
Right. So the truth is, soaking it in water is even worse because that destroys it because it's not edible anymore.
Okay, thank
You know what I mean? So yeah, that's not really a good thing to do. In fact, that's what we're trying to avoid. We don't want to get water on it, right? Because that destroys it basically. It makes it non-edible. So therefore, right, what you want to do is, if it's something larger than a kazite, as we said, right, you want to put it in a separate bag, and then throw it away. This way, it won't, you're not destroying it by throwing it in there. It's still very much intact inside the bag. But if they're smaller than a kazite, so then what we don't want is to leave it on the floor. This is what we don't want. So how do we avoid that? By right, sweeping it up. Yeah. So the truth is, right, that what you're asking about with the water, it is, that question is still open, because there may be certain scenarios where this can be done. But what I want to do is I want to go through this halakha, and see what they say about that. Uh, just to yeah, but just at the face of it, it seems like it's not a good idea because here what we're saying is that the problem was, that they were washing their hands, like over the table, and some of the water was dripping down onto the crumbs. This was the problem. So apparently we see, right? We don't want water on the crumbs. That's what it seems to be. Okay, anyway, right? But it makes it worse because it's on the floor also, so it becomes like a whole big mess. Okay, so that's the rule, with bread. So, if you want to, it's very important, to know what to do with bread, But the truth is, right, you're not allowed to destroy food. It's a rabbinic prohibition, you know, um, and that includes other foods as well, not only bread. But bread is like the worst scenario, because it's causes poverty, as we said, right? When a person, mistreats the bread, because it shows, a disregard for, God's, right, abundance, whatever. Okay, so let's see Shulchan Aruch, right, and what we find there regarding this. It's very important halacha, very practical, everyday really kind of thing. So this was right, Gimel and Dalet together, I think. Okay, so let's see. So it says Shulchan Aruch, קודם שייטול ידיו, right, before he washes his hands, יכבד הבית שלא יישארו שם פירורים, וימסו במים של נטילה, right? So that's what he's saying, right? That before you wash your hands, מים אחרונים, you should first sweep up the crumbs. Why is that? Because we don't want the water falling on the crumbs. ואף על פי שמותר לאבד פירורים שאין בהם כזית, says even though you're allowed to destroy, crumbs which don't have a kazite, שמא יהיה השמש amaretz, but he says we're worried that the waiter will be amaretz, ignorant, שמותר להשתמש בשמש amaretz, because you're allowed to have an ignorant waiter. והניח גם פירורים שיש בהם כזית. So then what he'll do is he'll also leave crumbs that have a kazite. שאסור לאבדם ביד, he's not allowed to destroy them. לכך יכבד את תחילה. So therefore he says what you should do is first sweep it up. ועכשיו אין אנו נוהגים כך. But he says now we're not accustomed to do that. מפני שאין אנו מסלקין השולחן. Because we don't remove the table. ואנו נוטלין הידיים מחוץ לשולחן מקום שאין בהם פירורים. So he says, and also we write, what do you call it? We wash the hands out, away from the table, right? And there's no crumbs there. Right? So there's no concern about that, right? But the truth is, right? Yes, there is no concern regarding that. But as Tosfot said, right, there is concern about poverty. So that's interesting. I'm a little bit surprised that he doesn't bring this here. Right, he brings it in next halacha. Okay, well, I knew it was coming. So in Dalet he says, right, like this. So he says, even though you're allowed to destroy them, Hashem ben kazait, the crumbs that don't have a kazait, but it is difficult, right? It causes poverty. So therefore, right, a person should not destroy them. Okay. So the truth is, when you're putting in water, you are destroying it. So as we said, right, probably the best solution is to put it into a separate bag. So let's see what the Mishnah Berurah here says. So Mishnah Berurah says like this. He says that's only when you step on them, right? אבל כשמשליכן המים, אפילו כשנאבדין על ידי זה, אין חשש כיוון שהוא פחות מכזית. ויש מחמירים כשיש הרבה פירורים והצטרפו כזית. So Mishnah Berurah says, right, you can throw it into the water, as we said, right? That's why I didn't want to close this case, you know? I knew there was some, there was some leniency there, you know? So the Mishnah Berurah is saying like this, that, the poverty is only caused when you step on it because it's like disgraces it like that. But to throw it into water, all right, the same thing would be to throw it into garbage. That wouldn't be a problem. Why is that? Because they're smaller than kazite. That's interesting, But the truth is that there is room, perhaps, to say differently as well. Not like this, what he's saying here, according to the simple meaning of the Shulchan Aruch. Yeah, it's very interesting. So, but that's his opinion here, in the Mishnah Berurah. Yeah, maybe we should look in Yalkut Yosef, see what it says about this. Very interesting. There may be some other opinions floating around regarding this issue. So maybe we should look over there in Kuf Pei. Okay, let's see. Maybe we can look there. There may be some other perspectives on this. And it is an important halacha, Okay, so let's take a look. We'll go to a different screen. Okay. And we'll see what we can find here. So we're going to Yalkut Yosef, Kuf Pei. Let's see. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so he brings, what we saw in the Shulchan Aruch, but what he doesn't bring is the Mishnah Berurah. Okay, that's very interesting. He doesn't bring that opinion. Hmm. Okay. So, all right, I guess we'll go back there. So I would say that seeing all this, probably, the better thing to do is to put it in a separate bag and not to destroy them. But definitely what the Mishnah Berurah is saying, there's definitely merit to that as well. Let's go back there for a second. So there's also here Magen Avraham. Let's just see what he says. So Magen Avraham also says like that, like the Mishnah Berurah. So definitely there is what to rely on here. So according to Magen Avraham, it's only, the problem only exists when you're stepping on it. But we're talking about the ones which are less than a kazite. But the truth is, if you look just in the regular text of the Gemara that we covered here, what is it really saying there? It's saying that we're afraid that the water is going to spill on the floor, which is on the crumbs. So according to that, apparently, there is a problem with the water as well. Very interesting. It needs some research, this maybe perhaps, this halakha. Not so simple, really. Go back to the Bet Yosef for a second. Let me just see what he writes there again. Yeah, that's what the Torah says, right? That the water makes them, disgusting. Yeah, so I don't know. According to that, really, it seems like you really shouldn't put it into water. Well, what can I say? But that would also mean you shouldn't put it into the garbage either. Straight into the garbage. So, probably the best solution would be, as we said, right, to put it in a separate bag. If you really want to be on the safe side, uh, and if you want to be a little bit adventurous, so then do like the Mishnah Rule, Magen Avraham. They said that you can throw it into water, but that would mean also into the garbage. Same thing. Okay, whatever. So anyway, that's pretty much the story there. I don't know what else to say. So we did Gimel and Daled. So these are important halachot, every day, everyday things. So we'll go to Hey. So it says over here in the Bet Yosef, Katav Rokach, says this rabbi, B'siman Shin Lamed Bet, B'chasin, right, Mechasin Sakin B'shat Brachot B'kat Hamazon, Al Shem Lo Tanif Aleim Barzel, right? So, you just asked me about this, right, a week ago regarding, leaving knives on the table, right, when you're doing B'kat Hamazon. So that's what it's talking about here. We got to that halacha. Believe it or not, we got there. So, right, it says the Rokach, what you should do is, cover the knives if you have knives on the table. So I guess, you don't have to really remove them. Covering them is also okay. We'll see what the halacha is, but anyway. Uh, so what's the problem? So he says he brings this pasuk, right? Lo tanif aleim barzel, right? That right? These metals are, like they're utensils of violence, right? Whatever, right? They're violent knives. דברים כ"ז במחילתא אין לנו הניף המקצה על מעריך השולחן כמזבח, right? So he says, since the verse tells you not to have, right, these types of iron, metal things on the altar, so he says, since your table at home is also compared to an altar, so you shouldn't have it there either. That's the thing there. Okay, so Marich Shulchan Kemizbeach Meshilhei Chagiga. That's in Chagiga, Kaf Zayin Amud Aleph. וכן כתב רבנו דוד עבוריהם. This rabbi says also. וכן כתוב בשיבו ללקט, also this rabbi. כתוב עוד בשיבו ללקט, מפני החבר רבי שמחה, שמעתי טעם אחר פעם אחד היה. So he says there's also another reason which is brought down from this rabbi. What does he say? There was once, right, the story there, היה אחד מברך ברכת המזון. There was a person who was doing Birkat Hamazon, כשיגיע לברכת בוני ירושלים, so when he got to Boni Yerushalayim, building Jerusalem, when he's Kara Churban, he remembered, the destruction of the temple. חורבן הבית, לקח הסכין ותקעו בבטנו. So he took the knife, right, and stuck it into his stomach. Whatever, he stabbed himself. Poor guy, he got so depressed. So that's why the custom comes, that we don't do that. We don't keep knives on the table. B'shat bracha, at the time of the blessing. V'shnei tamim elu ketuvim be'orchot chaim. Says these reasons are also brought down orchot chaim. V'noagim b'shabbatot v'yom tovim shelo chasot al-sakin, right? But he says on Shabbat and Yom Tov, right? We're not particular about that. As I told you, right? Shabbat and Yom Tov is different. So you can leave the knife there on Shabbat and Yom Tov. ולפי טעם רבי שמחה אין לה חלק בין שבת לאכול. But he says, according to Rabbi Simcha, you shouldn't differentiate between weekday in Shabbat. Kol makom minhagan shel Yisrael Torah hi. But he said that's a custom of the Jews, right? That we're not particular when it comes to Shabbat and Yom Tov. So there you go, right? That's halacha pretty much. Okay, so let's go to Shulchan Aruch, right, and see what it says there. Hey, so says Shulchan Aruch, "Noagim lechasot hasakin b'shat birkat hamazon." As we said, right, the custom is to cover the knives, right, at the time birkat hamazon. V'nahagu shelo lechasoto b'Shabbat v'Yom Tov. But as we said, right, Shabbat and Yom Tov, the custom is not to cover them. So there you go, right? Self-explanatory. Pretty clear. Okay, so I think we're done with this chapter. Okay, good. So I guess we'll move on. Kuf Pei Aleph. Right. So this is a very one of the most famous halachot in Shulchan Aruch. Right? What does it say? Mayim macharonim chova. What does that mean? That mayim macharonim is an obligation. Right? So don't think, yeah, it's not so important. I can get away with it. All right, don't do that. Not a good idea. So let's see the Turim Bit Yosef right before we get into Shulchan Aruch. Okay, Shulchan Aruch we already saw. Not much to see anymore. It's only 3 words. That's all you got. Okay, so yeah, let's see. So the tour brings the right the whole history of this thing, right? So he says then what you do is next thing that you do Mayim Achronim, as we said, right? Tana, right? All these rabbis taught, right? You should be holy, right? Sanctify yourselves, it says. Where is this in Vaikachaf? Elu Mayim Rishonim, right? That's talking about the water, the washing before the meal. Right? Besop Perek Elu Dvarim, which is in this Perek Elu Dvarim. And right? So he says that's an obligation. Kasina Perek Kol Basar, like it says in Kol Basar, Kufi Amud Aleph, Amar Avidi Bar Avin, this rabbi says, Mfaresh, Hatam Tama Mipnei Shemelach Sodomit Yesh, right? Shesatama Shemesamet Ainayim. So, right, so bottom line, right, that the Torah tells you, my machronim is an obligation. So comes Bet Yosef tells you, what's the reason for this? Because we're concerned about sodomite salt, right? We talked about this already. Which blinds the eyes, like it's very harmful, this thing. I guess it's very potent, whatever. So if it gets into your eyes, it can cause you, some serious problems. So we're concerned about that there may be some of that in your salt. So he says that the rabbi said regarding the melach sodomit, sodomite salt, I'll call achilatcha echol melach, right? They said, as we mentioned yesterday, right, that you should eat salt after you eat a meal. And since he touched the salt, right, and then when he comes, right, and puts his fingers on his eye, מסמל להוא, he's going to get blind like that. ולפיכך צריך לנטרן. So therefore he says he has to, right, wash his, he has to do מים אחרונים. Okay. So that's that. And then he goes on to say, כתב רבנו יונה, says רבנו יונה, וזה לשונו, אמר Rambam says, שאף על פי שעכשיו אין לנו מלח זמין. So he says, so Rambam comes out and says, right, nowadays we don't really have sodomite salt. But he says, יש לחוש מפני מלח אחר, שטבעו כמלח זמין. But he says there may be also some other types of salts, which are, have the same properties. ואם יעביר ידיו על גבי עיניו, so he says, if he will, if he's going to put his fingers, with the salt in his eyes, before washing, he's going to get blinded like that. Rabbeinu Yerucham katav b'shem Arif. It says this rabbi in the name of the Rif. Shafa pi shelo achal melech. Even though he didn't eat salt, chova litol yadav. He still has to wash his hands anyway. Mishum demayim achronim argut nefesh. Right? Why? So he says because there's a story in the Talmud, right, where this issue of mayim achronim, somebody got killed because of that. This whole story there, Yeah, so there's a Gemara that brings down the story about this guy who was he was a swindler, scammer, so there was a whole thing that happened there, whatever, and in the end, right, it caused somebody to die. This whole story over there. I don't remember all the details of the story, but anyway, right. So I won't tell you right now, but anyway. It's a whole drama kind of thing, like a little right, like exchange between three people, there's the scammer and his wife, and then the victim. It's like a whole thing that goes on there. Okay, whatever. That's what I remember in my head. But anyway, right, so he says, so he says, even a person, right, who goes to war, right, he's going out to war, right, so the rabbis absolved him from washing hands for the meal. But he says, nevertheless, right, mayim achronim is liable to do anyway. He's obligated. So the rabbis absolved him of the first washing, but not mayim achronim. Besel perek kama de Eruvin. Where is this? Brought down Eruvin. Yud Zayin Amud Bet. First perek, at the end of the first perek. Okay, so that's the story there. So, Okay, great, fantastic. That's it. So, yeah, the Shulchan Aruch we already did. It's just 3 words, right? Mayim achronim chova. That's all it says. Very simple. Why is the Shulchan Aruch so famous? Because what we do is, the Sfaradim, have this custom where before they do Mayim achronim, they say this Shulchan Aruch, Mayim achronim chova. They're accustomed to do that. Not everybody does it, by the way, but there is a Sephardi custom like this. So anybody know what the reason is for the custom? Why do we say this? This is extra credit, guys. Forget about it. This is a heavy-duty question. Okay. So, all right. No takers.
You mean while the soldiers are precluded from washing before a meal?
No, we're not talking about soldiers now, right? We're talking about, right? Why is it the custom by Sfaradim to say Mayim achronim chova before they do Mayim achronim? That's the question.
I'll let you answer that.
Yeah, you have me. Okay, so the answer is like this, right? It says the Ben Ish Chai, Rabbi Yosef Chaim, right? So, everybody calls him the Ben Ish Chai, but his real name was Rabbi Yosef Chaim. You know why they call him the Ben Ish Chai? Because his book, that was the name of his book. Very common, right? So he has also many other books that he wrote besides that, but that was like his most famous book that he wrote. But anyway, right, the Ben Ish Chai says that we say my machorim chova before we do my machorim. So we're like killing two birds with one stone. First of all, like we're telling people, this is like an obligation, to do my machorim. So don't forget, right? Remember that obligation. That's the first thing. Number two, right? It's also accomplishing another thing, which is right that if you learn Pirkei Avot a little bit, you know that right. There's Rabbi Shimon says there that it's very important to say Divrei Torah when we're eating on the table. So therefore, right, says the Ben Ish Chai, the custom is to say Ma'amar Ochinam Echovah, right? Because that's like Divrei Torah. It's a Shulchan Aruch, So therefore, right, if you didn't say any Divrei Torah on the table, let's say, you were like talking about the politics, whatever, right? You got into a whole discussion, about some other things, right? Whatever. Some other silly stuff. So just in case you didn't say Divrei Torah, so that'll be your Divrei Torah. You said Ma'amar Ochronim Chova. And that's the idea. That's the reason why we do it. Right? So okay, it's good, whatever. It's a good idea. Not exactly an obligation. Don't get me wrong. Okay, great. So that's that. Let's see what else we got. We got bet. So let's see first of all what the tour says, and then Bet Yosef, and we'll see if we have time to finish this today. So the tour says, right, that when you do my machronim, don't spill it on the ground. And anybody know why this is? Why you shouldn't spill it on the ground? So the reason is because they say, that it has impurity, the ma'amachronim. It's tameh. So you don't want this thing like, on the ground. It may harm somebody because it's impure. So therefore, right, we don't want it hanging around on the floor somewhere, because somebody could get hurt from that. So therefore, what we want to do is, like put it in a place where there's drainage, it drains down. So it doesn't stay around, it doesn't stay around. So, the best thing to do is, put it down the sink, right? That's the best idea for us. Okay, let's see the tour here. So I'll read the tour, right? The tour says like this. Right, so it says the tour, and nitlin al gabe karpa, right? It shouldn't be, as we said, right, put on the floor, because there's evil spirit there on them. Umiu im notel al gabe etzim dakim o kiyotze behen shapir damim. But it says what you can do is, like spill it over some twigs, and things like this. So this way it'll get absorbed, and go down. drained down. Shapir dameh ve'en nitilin ela betzonen. So he says also, right, you should use cold water for this, not hot water. Lo bechamin, right? So, what about warm water? Can you use that for mayim achorim? The answer is yes. But we don't want hot water, like which is like too hot to touch. Why? Because that doesn't really clean your hands. It makes your hands sticky, the grime doesn't get off like that. מפני שמפעפעים את הידיים ואין מעבירים את הזוהמה. ודווקא החמין שיד צולד מכבד בהם. As we said, right? That's only if it's too hot to touch. אבל פושעים שפיר דמה, but warm water is okay, as we said, right? Okay, great. So that's the tour. Let's see Bet Yosef. If we have time, we'll read it now. If not, we'll do it next time. Let's see how big it is. Okay, so not too big. Yeah, I guess we can knock this off tonight. We can knock it off. Then so it says like this, right? בפרק כל בשר, it's in חולין, right? קופי עמוד א', מים ראשונים נתלים בין בכלי בין גם בקרקע. So he says when it comes to the right, when it comes to the first washing, right before the meal, you can put it into a utensil, right? Drain, pour it in, or pour it on the ground. But achronim, when it comes to my machronim, any tlin ela b'kli. So there we want it in a utensil, right? Any tlin ela gabe karpa. And some say you shouldn't put it on the ground. My benayu, what's the difference between them? Ika benayu kinsa. Rashi. So Rashi explains kinsa in noten shafai etzim v'kismin. Right? If you put like twigs and it gets absorbed in there, right? Talk to him. Leman diamar kli, the one who says it's a utensil. Hachal lav kli. This is not a utensil. Or man diamar, but the one who says don't put it on the ground. Shapir dame, then it's okay. Mashma de Rabbeinu dechevan de midi de Rabbananhu. So says the two, right? Like this, understands him. He understands that since it's rabbinical, we can go lenient, right? Niktina lakula, so that we go lenient opinion. Vechen kat dat Rashba, so the Rashba says also, but Torah bite. Aval Rambam katab perk vav v'inchot berachot, but the Rambam says the mayim achronim enam nitim al gabikli. Right? The Rambam says differently, right? He says it should be going into a vessel. Right, and not into twigs. Okay. Rabbeinu Ditama, Rabbeinu Ditama Den Natintini Agabi Karka Hu Mishum Ruacha. Right, and that which the Rabbeinu said, right, the tour, that it's because of evil spirit. Achi Meforash B'Gemara. Right, that's why it's in the Gemara. Perek Kol Basar, right, in Chulin over there. Okay, fantastic. So we got that. So we'll do Shulchan Aruch and we're done for the night. Okay. So says like this, right? My machorim enitim gabe karpa, as we said, karka, right? We don't put my machorim on the floor. We don't pour it on the floor. We don't spill it on the floor. Ela bekli. So what should we do, right? Put it into a vessel, right? Mipnei ruach ra, because it says ruach ra. Shishur alehem. Ve'im en lo kli. Ve'im en lo kli notel al gabe etzim. So he says if he doesn't have a vessel, then he can put it on top of the twigs, as we said, right? Dakim, kitzip, and things like this. So in other words, we prefer to put it into a vessel because, as we said, right, that's what the Rambam wants. But if he doesn't have a vessel, so then, right, put it into the twigs, like the other opinion. But as we said, right, for us, the best solution is to, drain it out into the sink, right? This way, it'll disappear, right? So, nothing better than that. Okay, great. So I guess we're done. B'ezrat Hashem, thank you for coming tonight. Be blessed with wealth and health and happiness. Laila Tov, Chazak u'Baruch. And we'll see you on Sunday. Right, B'ezrat Hashem, because tomorrow is Shabbat. And have a great Shabbat. Shabbat Shalom.
Kavod Tarav, thank you so much.
God bless.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Hey, Rabbi.
All the best.